Okay, so the Bible was written over 1,500 years, over the span of 1,500 years. And academics come to that conclusion because the internal evidence of the Pentateuch, the first five books of the Bible, is a clear indicator that Moses was the author of the Genesis and Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. So Moses is the author, and we ask, when did he write it? And the internal evidence says he's the writer, and we find out when he wrote it based on a few things. Some of it is genealogies, and then some of it is simply tracing the archaeological, historical evidence of when the Exodus happened. During the years of wandering in the wilderness, those 40 years is when most believe Moses wrote down much of what we know of the Torah. And so as you trace the history of Israel, whether it's in the scriptures and you're following genealogies or you're doing archaeological and historical evidence, many come to the conclusion that Israel in the wilderness, 1400 BC. Fast forward to 100 AD, and many believe that John completed the book of what we know as of Revelation. So we have 1,500 years of history and writing, and in the 1,500 years and many, many, many writers of the scriptures, we come to these moments where we find seemingly contradictions. And I want to address one that was brought up. So in Matthew chapter 20, Jesus is on his way into Jerusalem for his final days of his earthly ministry. He's has his face set. He's going to go die for the sins of his people and rise again. Well, before he gets there, we're in Matthew 20, and let me read some of the question here. Verse 29 says, "And as they went out," hear that, they went out of Jericho, a great crowd followed him. Verse 30, "And behold, there were two blind men sitting by the roadside. And when they heard that Jesus was passing, they cried out, 'Lord, have mercy on us.'" It's a wonderful passage of Jesus being a gracious and kind Savior who responds to desperate people. But Matthew says, in his portrait, in his explanation of who Jesus is and what he did, what he's done, in this moment, he documents for us that as Jesus went out of Jericho, there was two blind men crying in desperation. Well, that's fine, but we come to Mark. Mark chapter 10, and says, "Not when they were coming out of Jericho, but," Mark 10:46, "when they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus," not sure if I'm saying that right, "was sitting by the roadside, and he began to cry." So Mark, he says two things that are slightly different. Number one, they came to Jericho, and then he was leaving Jericho, and the highlight of Bartimaeus. Luke, similar thing. Chapter 18 says, verse 35, "As Jesus drew near to Jericho, a blind man, no name given, cried out, asking in a desperate way for help." So there's a seeming contradiction here, and it's not. So let me explain just what we're reading here. Each of the gospel writers are focusing on something different as they have a portrait of what happened at that event. Matthew documents there's two of them crying out, and Jesus, by way of time frame, is leaving Jericho. Let's deal with how many first. Matthew says there's two, yet Mark and Luke emphasize one man. And there's good reason to believe that there were even more than two, not at this particular instance, but throughout the city, at different periods. Both Mark and Luke emphasize one person who may have been the loudest, who may have been the leader, who maybe was known by name and the other wasn't. That's not too big of a deal. Often we have that in the Gospels, or quite frankly, even in history. You read two news accounts and someone talks about something that happened, and one particular person is emphasized because they speak the loudest, they were interviewed first, things like that. So there's no contradiction. There are two men. One man is emphasized in Mark and Luke. But the real interesting thing is the time frame. This is one singular event where Jesus was both going out of Jericho in healing and going into Jericho in healing. Well, how's that possible? Well, the city of Jericho has an amazing history, not just in the biblical narrative, but even outside of biblical history. So Jericho comes up first in the book of Joshua, as Joshua and the people of Israel are really taking conquest over the wicked Canaanite city called Jericho, and Jericho is destroyed. And what we're reading in the Gospels is that there are two Jerichos. And this isn't just biblical history. You can read this. Archaeologists, academics, even who are non-Christian, affirm this. The city of Jericho has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. So I tried to put a picture here up on the screen, and hopefully it comes through on the right. There is an old Jericho that had been destroyed during the days of Joshua. And then to the west of that, there is a modern Jericho that had been rebuilt. And again, through history, Google search this. It's been destroyed and rebuilt, not just in biblical times, but outside of biblical times, again and again and again and again. So what most understand is Jesus was walking out and leaving old historic Jericho and walking into new modern Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. You had to pass through old Jericho to get into modern Jericho to head toward Jerusalem. So that's what's happening here. All three of the synoptic gospel writers are correct. Jesus was going out of old Jericho, Matthew chapter 20. Jesus was drawing near to modern Jericho, Luke chapter 18. And Mark kind of seems to say both in Mark 10. They came to Jericho, and as they were leaving Jericho, the healing took place. And so, there's a lot of times in which having some history, doing some Google searches, old school, pulling up an encyclopedia and reading of the history of a city is really helpful for us as we read the scriptures. Hope that helps.